Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir, bienvenue au Club Suisse de la Presse. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the Geneva Press Club. It is a real pleasure to welcome you here in Geneva or online for this special Greytalk. It is also an honor for me to welcome two gentlemen coming especially from us from Scotland. They were both trained as brilliant physicians. One is a passionate book collector, the other worked as a director of programs at WHO, World Health Organization, and they work now as co-authors. Dr. Stefan, Slater, Dr. David Macfadyen, thank you for being with us today in Geneva. You're going to tell us tonight the story of two other great gentlemen, two artists, Legacy of Derso and Kelen, also simply called Derso and Kelen. Their names count, especially here in the Geneva Press Club, so close to the Place des Nations and its Palais des Nations. During 3 decades, from the 1920s to the 1950s, they changed the view and the public opinion, and so many international and political events. They both witnessed and lived through so many ups and downs of 20th century history. Their names count in the history of cartooning, of art, of press, of freedom of expression too, and of course in the history of the League of Nations and emerging United Nations. Their names, their work count because we inherit now the world they described nearly a century ago with such wit, humor and insight. And last but not least, I was so pleased to learn that Derso and Kelen, the two of them met in 1922 in my hometown of Lausanne. I want to warmly thank Greycells for choosing the Geneva Press Club tonight for this special Greytalk. And I'm very pleased to give now the floor to Greycells President, Mr. Alejandro Bonilla-Garcia. Alejandro.
Good evening, everyone. I am Alejandro Bonilla. I'm the president of Greycells, and I would like to welcome you to this really, as Isabelle mentioned, very special Greytalk. I would like to recognize Madame Sihal Sultanoglu, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, and Madame Charlotte Desenarclans, member of the board of Freedom Cartoon Foundation. We are very happy to have you here with us tonight. Dear girlfriends, ladies and gentlemen, this is really very special for many things. The first one is the first Greytalk that we perform in collaboration with a partner, in this case, the Swiss Press Club. We are extremely happy to have to be building this partnership, not only for our Greytalks, but also, and this is some new information, for our flagship activity, which is the intergenerational dialogue that will take place in this same room on the 25th of April on the future of United Nations. What is the role of Geneva in the UN 2.0? We're expecting to bring the voice of NGOs in Geneva to Nairobi in May, and then to New York and the summit of the future. So we are extremely happy to have this collaboration with the Club Suisse de la Presse. It is also really very special because this is the first time that our speakers prefer to travel overseas than speaking on Zoom. Thank you very much. That is really very generous from you, and we're extremely happy to have you here with us. We thank your generosity, your time, your traveling, spending here in Geneva, also your talent. When we got in touch for the first time, I thought that they were cartoonists themselves. And then they woke me and said, well, we're not cartoonists, we're medical doctors, but we are interested in this. So they walked me through things, and it's really hard work that they did, and they are very generous also because they prepare for us 2 presentations that they will show in a few minutes' time. So everything will be recorded, and your bios will be put in the recording, but just for information, general information, I would like to introduce each one of you. Stefan Slater, retired consultant physician in internal medicine, specializing in diabetes and endocrinology, MD with honors and fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, Glasgow, London, and Ireland, book collector for nearly 50 years, specializing in medical history and in illustrated material, especially the art, caricature, and cartoon of both world wars and political cartooning between the wars and the Belle Epoque. He has published in all these fields. David Macfayden graduated in medicine at the University of Glasgow and completed postgraduate studies at the Universities of London and Harvard. Founded and led the WHO Global Program on Aging, and before retiring, was director of programs in the Europe region of WHO. After retiring, he completed a doctoral thesis on the genealogy of WHO and UNICEF. In 2019, he co-authored the book Eric Drummond and His Legacies, The League of Nations and the Beginnings of Global Governance, published in Cham, Switzerland by Palgrave Macmillan. It's really an honor and a privilege to have you here with us today, so I give the floor to both of you. I understand that it will be Stefan who starts. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Alejandro, Madame Falconnier, Manuela, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you who are with us online. It's a delight to be here, and thank you very much for inviting us. Now, with a bit of luck, whoops, there we go. Let me begin our talk with an overview of these two remarkable cartoonists, Alois Derso and Emery Kellen. This, our book, covers their life and times from the League of Nations' hopes for peace in the 1920s to despair at the rise of fascism in the 30s, and then hope again with the founding of the United Nations in 1945. It contains 100 memorable images, 2/3 in colour. Few, if any, are likely to have been seen by present-day readers. Now, on the front cover there, you see the British Prime Minister, advocate of appeasement, Neville Chamberlain, soon after the Munich Agreement in September 1938, sacrificing Czechoslovakia. Sarcastically drawn, slaying the dragon of war with just his Englishman's rolled umbrella. Here they are in 1950, Derso left, Kellen right. Both were born in Hungary, Derso in 1888, Kellen in 1896. They served in its army in the First World War. Derso, a trained artist by then, ordered to find art items worth stealing from captured Italian churches, while Lieutenant Kellen won a medal at the Battle of Caporetto. Soon after the war, they emigrated, Derso to Paris to work for Le Matin, Kellen to Munich to study art. Kellen says in this, his marvelous autobiography, "I didn't know that Munich already had a struggling artist, Adolf Hitler." They first met in 1922 in Lausanne, where each was reporting on the post-war treaty conference between the Allies and Turkey, and began a very fruitful collaboration that would last almost 30 years. For over half that time, they lived here in Geneva, closely following the League and its personalities. We much admire their work for its political insight and foresight, its wit and gentle satire, its artistry and its historical value, and for their unique graphic technique. For they worked jointly, one starting perhaps with the face of a politician and passing the picture between them until both were satisfied. For example, Kelen tells us that Derso was excellent at sketching postures and gestures, but that his hands and feet had a tendency to fly around, and it was his job to sew the body together. They've been called the Siamese twins of satire, cleverly portrayed in this caricature. Here are a few of their images. Le Paradis, from their 1931 portfolio, The Testament of Geneva, 10 years of international cooperation. It's a delightful, gently satirical picture of the League of Nations in a Garden of Eden, war-free world. At the center, Adam and Eve, two innocent international civil servants, work under the tree of knowledge, surrounded by an exotic menagerie of leading politicians and others, represented symbolically as big beasts and smaller creatures. They all appear to be on agreeable terms. But there's Mussolini, a prowling tiger, with his jackal-like foreign minister Dino Grandi. Behind him, on your left, a lion with flowing white mane, is Ramsay MacDonald, British Prime Minister, challenging shaggy-maned French Foreign Minister, the remarkable Aristide Briand. Near top right is a black eagle, the German Foreign Minister, Julius Curtius, whom they've cleverly drawn, perched unstably on a prickly cactus, the Weimar Republic. Below him, next to Adam, is a small pale bear, Maxim Litvinov, the Russian people's chief commissar for foreign affairs. His ghostly appearance, a likely allusion to the fact that Russia was not yet a member of the League, but an influence to be acknowledged. Overlooking them all, top left there, is a large black eagle, Britain's Lord Robert Cecil, who, with US President Woodrow Wilson, was a prime mover in forming the League, though, as you know, the US tragically didn't join it. All of the figures are named, a very unusual feature in cartoons, but most useful for future generations. Hitler, Stalin, and Churchill will forever be recognized worldwide in caricature, but memories of the look of most politicians fade. Here from the same collection is Briand's Ark, an allegory of Noah's, picturing the precariousness of the Locarno Treaties of 1925, which had appeared to guarantee peace, and for which the lead negotiators, the British, French, and German foreign ministers, Austen Chamberlain, Aristide Briand, and Gustav Stresemann, had received the Nobel Peace Prize. Shaggy-haired Briand has sent off a dove of peace, but the olive branch is being returned by a duck, un canard. Clever symbolism. Another allegorical cartoon, The Promised Land, showing Briand, a latter-day Moses, leading his disciples, League statesmen and others, to a high mount from which he points to his vision in 1929 of a United States of Europe. This promised land, his peace concept, is insightfully given the appearance of a mirage, and the idea faded with Briand's death 3 years later. Derso and Kelen produced illustrated menu cards for the annual international press lunches in Geneva, and the pictures they drew influenced the speeches of attending politicians. David will give an example. In this one, in 1932, they seemed to want to provoke the day's speaker into revealing something about the progress of the League's disarmament conference then. For they've drawn a puzzled journalist facing leading world statesmen depicted as enigmatic, inscrutable sphinxes, saying nothing, but sitting under a palm tree bearing strange fruit, bombs, its trunk encased in a large gun barrel, while pyramids of plans, proposals, and petitions for peace are being shoveled up. An ostrich with its head in the sand adds to the number of visual metaphors. The journalist is identified as Clarence Street, then president of the Journalists Association and a staff correspondent of the New York Times. There's a close-up. All these menu cards were later collected in a bilingual portfolio of Banquet de Nation, the League at Lunch, and the original artwork hung in the Palais des Nations, still there. This cartoon, Please Replace the Turf, is from another bilingual portfolio. It shows the nations at golf at Onyx near here in 1932, shocked at the large motte de terre being hacked out by Japan's Yotaro Sugimura, League Under-Secretary General. Its pieces fly towards the British Foreign Secretary, Sir John Simon, and US Secretary of State, Henry Stimson, who had sent a disapproving note to Japan for its invasion of Manchuria. La Motte is, by analogy, Manchuria. And Derso and Kelen sarcastically add, there in French, that members of the golf club shouldn't see any connection between its Rule 6 about replacing the turf and Article 10 of the League Covenant that member states should respect each other's territorial integrity. Do you see where the golf ball has gone? It's heading for Secretary General Sir Eric Drummond's nose. This is the key message in a very clever cartoon, that the League has been tested and found wanting. This, in contrast to the Promised Land, is The New Lilliput, published in May 1938, a picture no longer of hope, but of despair. Hitler lies sprawled across Europe, an untied down Gulliver, surrounded by Lilliputian European politicians, all of whose countries would, insightfully of Derso and Kelen, soon be overrun by him. Also insightfully, they portray Mussolini sitting on Hitler's finger as equally Lilliputian compared to him. Bottom right, in a top hat, Neville Chamberlain and his Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, stare haplessly at the contemptuously placed Sieg Heil on Hitler's boot. This was drawn in March, within days of the Anschluss, Hitler's annexation of Austria, the Danube in the background. Kelen wrote, "Those who had once believed in the League of Nations wandered its corridors like sick flies." And this striking image, boots, gloves, and refugees, more fine art than cartoon, represents the flood of refugees fleeing in terror before the blood-dripping boots of the Nazis, but restrained by governments, those white gloves there, of consular authorities refusing sanctuary. And another in 1938, post-Munich, Minuet, everyone named, playing or dancing to the Horst Wessel Lied, the Nazi Party anthem. In other words, dancing to Hitler's tune. Hitler commandingly partners a fearful Edouard Daladier, the French premier, while Chamberlain bows obsequiously to Mussolini, trying to keep Italy on side. Lord Halifax glumly plays the cello, having second thoughts about appeasement, while top right, Litvinov sits alone, watching the charade, Russia sidelined. It's a skillful and most insightful tableau of the European political situation. Here's a brilliant cartoon of Chamberlain in June 1939, just 3 months before the war, still believing it could be averted or at least postponed. Look how well drawn is the doubt on the faces of the European nations under his protecting umbrella. Kelen, in his autobiography, provides an embittered pen picture of Chamberlain, which ends with, "The umbrella will go down in history as a symbol of perfidious appeasement, and its owner as a high-minded sucker." This, my last example, is Derso and Kelen's imaginative pre-war summing up. A mountain of treaties lie on a scale balanced against a small but highly explosive shell, while a mysterious hand floating in the air inscribes in Aramaic, "Mane takel ufarsen," "You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting," just as, biblically, it wrote on the wall of Belshazzar's palace, predicting the downfall of his dynasty and now Europe's doom. Derso and Kelen followed the League more than any other cartoonists and showed its positive achievements, often forgotten or ignored. In late 1938, after 16 years here, they emigrated to the US to escape Hitler and focused on anti-Nazi images, and later on the emergence of the United Nations, all of which we cover and illustrate. Their work featured widely in the European and then US print media, most notably in Ken, the remarkable short-lived 1938-39 US magazine from which those last few images come. Launched by Arnold Gingrich, editor of Esquire, it aimed to inform Americans of Europe's political disintegration, but was accused of warmongering, lost its advertising revenue, and folded. Derso and Kelen did not know Gingrich, and it's a sign of their reputation that he wrote to them from Chicago while they were still here in Geneva to work for him. Kelen went on to write, edit, and or illustrate 25 books, many about the UN. He became its TV director, winning an Emmy and other awards. Derso died in 1964, Kelen in 1978. And thanks to David's detective work, we've made contact with Kelen's daughter Julia in the US, and it's a thrill to know that she's here with us online. Thank you.
Well, just looking at the audience tonight, I think you're all far too young ever to have been to the Brasserie Bavaria. But I can put my hand up and say that I have been to the Brasserie Bavaria, and it was there almost half a century ago that I first saw the cartoons of Derso and Kelen. There were 150 on the walls of the Brasserie. And as you've seen, there's a lot to take in Derso and Kelen cartoons, so I'll try to simplify it by just giving you a couple of descriptors. The first is tableau vivant. This is the term we use in the book to describe the style of Derso and Kelen. This is La Tour de Babel, and they densely populate their cartoon with caricatured individual whom they name. Here there are 272 from the League of Nations. A good number of them, you see, are crowded into the lower right, into the Bavaria. This was the gossiping place of the League, la potinière of the League of Nations. Sorry, can you hear me all right? My next descriptor is gentle satire. Typically, Derso and Kelen caricatured their subjects with gentle satire, as seen in this detail of the warm-hearted and brilliant leader of ILO, Albert Thomas. Kelen tells us that when he died aged 54, the men and women of ILO wept bitterly. He added, international civil servants tend by occupation to be skeptics, but I've got to admit that they know when to cry. On the other hand, we see unflattering images. On the ladder is Romanian delegate Ellen Vacarescu, whom the artist invariably depicted as ungainly, obese, with gaudy jewelry. But this was untypical of them. The next descriptor is classical illusion. Would you put your hands up if you've ever been to the Bar de la Presse in the Palais des Nations? Well, you'll have seen there the menu cards of Derso and Kelen, much admired by our colleague Jean-Claude Pallas, who I think is online tonight, author of the magnificent book on the Palais des Nations, from which I quote here. The League bought this one for 350 Swiss francs. The finance officer of the time charged it to occupation of new building miscellaneous. It's one of several that allude to classical art, Géricault's Le Radeau de la Méduse, which hangs in the Louvre. We see League Secretary Eric Drummond sitting on the chest-marked budget, defending it from attack with a pair of pistols. The next descriptor is historical evidence. A decade ago, John Burley and I, plus two other colleagues, began to research the life and work of Eric Drummond. This cartoon, drawn at the time Germany entered the League, was found among Sir Eric's private papers. We see him sitting on the left of German Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann as guest of honor. This led us to discover that Drummond had spent long periods each year in Germany between the ages of 20 and 23. He'd not gone to university, as many historians claimed. This is an example, then, of how cartoons serve to provide historical evidence. Can I ask you a question, then? On what date did the Great War end? No, well, the answer is actually on this slide. And not as you expect, 1919, but the 24th of July, 1923. This was the date when the Treaty of Lausanne was signed, ending the war with Turkey. Our book was published in the centennial year of this important treaty, the Treaty of Lausanne. La Maison Historique de Lausanne mounted a display of Derso and Kelen's cartoons for the centennial, but it didn't include this image. The scene is an apotheosis. The delegates are angels. And I would remind you of what Dag Hammarskjöld said, that the UN was not created to take us to heaven, but to stop us from descending into hell. Among the figures who appended signatures on the tablecloth is the American Ambassador Grew, the erect figure on the left of the table. Unfortunately for the cartoonist, he wasn't there. The significance of the US presence in the cartoon is evident from this detail of Angel Chester, who is gathering money from a cornucopia, a concession for a rail link to the oil fields of Iraq. Kelen quipped that the conference was about oil that everybody wanted and refugees that nobody wanted. This image is from the Lausanne conference, and it shows chief delegate of Russia, Chicherin, firing a pistol, and it was uncannily prophetic. His colleague Vorowski on the right, an extreme on his right, was killed, and Ahrens with the tambourine to his left was wounded by Russian exile Moritz Conradi in May 1923. The surprise acquittal of the assailant fractured relations between Switzerland and the Soviet Union for many years. The woman dancing the hopak is the famous English journalist Claire Sheridan, who was correspondent for the New York World, and quite a well-known character. Derso and Kelen transmuted dull League proceedings into ingenious fancies, notably in Le Testament de Genève. This beautiful ribbon-tied portfolio is a good-humoured parody that covers events from the League's foundation in 1919 till 1931, and I think is the most impressive of Derso and Kelen's portfolios. It depicts the League's work in justice, finance, the protection of minorities, the reduction of trade barriers, as seen here in the blowing down of customs walls. Peace and disarmament get scarcely a mention in Le Testament de Genève. Derso and Kelen menu cards, which Stefan referred to, influenced the politicians of the day, and they sparked interesting and significant after-dinner speeches, notably by the charismatic Aristide Briand. Briand, by the way, is the stooped figure speaking to the statue you see here. At the actual banquet, he picked up the menu card, beaming with good humor, and said, "Well, what do I see here? A tiny fellow making a desperate effort to be convincing to the fearsome god of war." And he drifted on in this amiable, good-humored way, till suddenly, with a sudden change of tone, he slammed the cartoon down on the table and said, "They say I do nothing but bleat about peace." And then, in a breathless whisper, said, "Till my dying day, I'll bleat about peace." This is the chef-d'oeuvre, the masterpiece of Derso and Kelen, and it was the most difficult to source. The original work was acquired by the late Donald Stampley, who had a photography studio in Carouge. Donald photographed the work that you see and sold the original to a lady from Lausanne. Fortunately, Jean-Claude Pallas retained this large photograph. He walked with it under his arm into the mairie in the town he lived in, Charente, and had it digitized. And if you're online, Jean-Claude, I would like to say a grand merci for doing this. Derso and Kelen honored the Michelangelo of cartoons, André Daumier. Daumier published a lithograph of the same name, L'Assaut de la Tribune, in 1849, when established order in Europe was under assault. Derso and Kelen's Assault of the Tribune is an imaginative summation of the politics of 1936. It shows politicians climbing ladders, steps, and ropes to be the first to reach the rostrum, some with ill intentions for the world, like Goebbels on the top left. Here, in the bottom left corner, Mussolini and Hitler are dressed for war. Now, the figures in this wear the centuries-old costume. You might have recognized these as those of the Escalade, and that put our artists in hot water. I don't think there's anyone here from the Tribune de Genève, so I can safely say that the editor got it seriously wrong in 1936. This cartoon did not decorate the bar of the League of Nations. Derso and Kelen produced the large canvas in lieu of bills for Madame Tonetti, proprietor of the pension in which they lived, and it was for display in the Hotel du Palais, which she managed. Ironically, the The newspaper protested this advocacy of freedom of expression, claiming that it desecrated a glorious page of Geneva's history. Honour was satisfied by deleting the so-called Swiss cross on the chest of the person carrying the ladder. The United Nations sketchbook records multinational cooperation beginning anew, with the commitment of nations through the UN Charter to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in equal rights of men and women. Here, Eleanor Roosevelt has the children reciting together, "The rights of the individual are above the rights of the state." You see it more clearly on this screen here. The artists portray the Soviet delegate Andrei Vyshinsky in the naughty corner wearing a dunce's hat. Incredibly, Kelen published this while still working for the UN. Kelen's wife Betty concluded a memoir on Derso Kelen with these very affectionate words, referring to her donation in 2002 of Derso Kelen's entire collected works to Princeton University. And I should add Julie Kelen's name too, since Julie is online, as Stefan said. The watercolour on the left is from the Princeton collection. This is a wonderful example of Derso Kelen's work. The trunk of the tree is the UN, with branches showing agencies which many of us worked. A significant detail is Tryggve-Lee's dousing of a cat and dog fight. This is a visual reference to the new power given to the Secretary-General under Article 99 of the Charter. Why, you might ask, have Stefan and I immersed ourselves in the lives and work of these two cartoonists over the past years? For my part, this cartoon offers an explanation. Dr. Olive Bunch is depicted removing spikes from a tree in Palestine. Hanging on the left of the canopy are the Stars of David, on the right, the crescent moons of the Arab world. Bayonet and weapons nourish the tree roots, while pastoralists from both communities go about their work in the distance. Both sides viewed Bunch as a friendly figure, and he established himself as an impartial mediator, bringing Israelis and Egyptians to the negotiating table on the island of Rhodes. He subsequently secured armistice agreements between Israel and 4 Arab states. Now let me set the scene. Gentlemen, you are in the Palais des Nations, you're in the delegates' dining room, and the PA comes to you and announces to you, you have just received the Nobel Prize. What would your reaction be? Well, this was Bunch's. He was doubtful whether a member of the Secretariat should accept such an award, and wrote a letter declining it on the grounds that peacekeeping at the UN was not done for prizes. For the last decade, I've had a curiosity about how collaboration between sovereign nations began, and about how the UN came to be served by an international civil service that is independent and impartial, as so well exemplified by Ralph Bunche. Well, as John Burley wrote, this is where it all began. The foundation of today's global cooperation was that elusive aerial, l'esprit de Genève. I thank you, and I leave you with Derso and Kelen's nostalgia for the Bavaria. If you want an entertaining account of multinational cooperation beginning anew in the early years, you'll find it in our book. Stefan and I are exceedingly grateful to the Press Club and to Greycells for giving us this opportunity to present the work of 2 cartoonists who were themselves accredited journalists, and in the case of Kelen, also a former UN staff member. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, David. Maybe please join me here, both of you, so we can open the discussion with the audience here. Would you have online any questions? Would you have here any comments or questions? And I'll give you the microphone so that we can go on with discussion with David and Stefan. Thank you so much for the really interesting description of their work and life of Derso Kelen. So, who'd like to start for a question or comment? Do any of you recognize any? Yeah, okay, sir. So you can just maybe introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan and David, for this presentation. David finished up on Ralph Bunche, which brings me to a question which may be a little unfair question. But if you, knowing Derso and Kelen like you do, can you possibly imagine if they were alive and cartooning today, how they would present the current terrible conflict in Gaza? How would they handle that from their perspective of trying to see all sides of the conflict? Thank you.
Can I start off? Yes, on you
go. Please, if you can use the microphone so that people online can hear you too. Thank you.
First of all, I mentioned Article 99, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But first, let me say that Derso and Kelen would first and foremost said the important lesson from the days of the League was the importance of impartiality and being totally independent and impartial. I think that's the first thing they would have said, having seen how effective that was in the League. Article 99 gave the Secretary-General power that the League Secretary-General did not have. It gave the Secretary-General the opportunity to call the Security Council, which the Secretary-General just did in respect to Gaza. The other thing I would say is that Kelen was very friendly with Raphael Lemkin. Raphael Lemkin was a man who termed the word genocide, and he, during his League days even, tried to get genocide accepted as a part of international law. And after 1945, succeeded in doing that. And Kelen described him like a hermit crab because he had no official position. He slept in people's offices in the UN and managed to do that. So it has been brought before the International Court of Justice, which is the successor organization of the PCIJ under the League. So these are two immediate reflections I have. But maybe Stefan would like to continue.
Well, it's a great question, John. How would they have visualized the current hellishness in Gaza and Israel? And the answer is I don't know. But I can say this. One of the things that distinguishes them from probably most cartoonists, and I think David alluded to this, is that their cartoons tended to be fairly even-handed. They seldom appear to take sides. They really were trying to show that there could be collaboration. Now, there is one cartoon which we know of, published in Ken, that US magazine, which we chose not to show in our book. And this cartoon shows the three prophets. It shows Moses pointing to the Torah, Muhammad pointing to the Quran, and Christ in the middle with thorns in his head looking impassively on at the scene. And all of these three prophets had claims to the land of then Palestine. And below, the scene they're looking at is essentially the Arab rebellion. It is impossible to say. They were both Jewish, and they certainly supported the founding of the State of Israel. But I rather suspect there would have been an element that showed that they could appreciate the problems on both sides. That's the best I can do, John. Don't ask another awkward question like that.
Stefan and David, I'd be... Stefan and David, I'd be interested to know how your personal history with Derso Kelen started, how you started collecting Derso Kelen work, how you started and why you started working on their work and ending with this beautiful and very interesting book.
Okay, well, I've been, as you said in the introduction, I've been collecting books for some 50 years, and I've been particularly interested, aside from the history of medicine, obviously, I've been particularly interested in illustrations and illustrators, and especially in the both the First and the Second World Wars, and in political cartooning between the wars. So I've been at this for a long time. And when I first, purely by accident, some 15 years ago, was presented by a book dealer, many book dealers know of my interest, with a lithograph that had been done by Derso Kelen, I thought, my goodness, I didn't know about these guys, but I was struck by, particularly by their artistry. Not for them, you know, a few strokes and with a black pencil. So I began to collect them. And again, by chance, I first met David some 4 or 5 years ago at an annual Arts, Crafts and Collectors exhibition that I run at the Royal College of Physicians. And I learned that he, with you, John, and others, were about to publish a book on the League of Nations. And he learned that I had Derso Kelen material, at which he nearly fainted. So we then, a bit like Derso Kelen, got together, presented a paper to one of the conferences on the League, published it, and then thought, well, why don't we write a book? Because no book had ever been written before. Very little has been written by Derso Kelen, and that's the reason why we got together and why we did what we did.
Perfect. David, is there something you maybe had to add to this story?
Has anyone been to La Châtaigneraie here? Anyone go to school at La Châtaigneraie? Well, my son was a boarder at La Châtaigneraie, and he was very unhappy there, and he ran away. And he ran away and stayed with a colleague from ILO, Johanna Schregler, who was a director at ILO. And I came back to Geneva. I had been posted to the Philippines, as you know. And I came back to Geneva, and I took the Schreglers out to lunch at the Bavaria. And there on the walls, I said there were 150 caricatures of people from the League of Nations. It was just a wonderful treasure, and I saw that for the very first time. What happened to those? Well, Stefan and I and John had lunch at what was the Bavaria today. All the cartoons were purchased by Mr. Ivan Pictet, and they are now in a collection that he has. So that my interest began a long time ago, and then this incredible chance encounter I had with Stefan, probably the only person in the United Kingdom who could answer yes to the question, have you got any cartoons by Derso Kelen? Could I just add a word that I say, sorry, yes, Merit, sorry.
Just wait for the microphone.
I'm also very impressed. You also wrote a book about Sir Eric Drummond. When did your interest start, and how long time did you use to gather all these materials?
What was how did we get all the material?
How long did it get to? How long did it get? Did it need to for you to get the material together? I think that was the question. Yeah.
Well, I already had a lot of the material in my collection. Unfortunately, not the original artwork, if only. But just about all of the portfolios that they published, including the Testament of Geneva, which, as David says, a lovely item and a collector's item, and most, if not all of the virtually all of the books that Kelen subsequently published. So that was one source. The other source was at their archives at the University of... Yeah, you had it, David, yeah.
Well, Merit Foster, who asked the question, herself is familiar with the archives at the League of Nations. They have a very, very good archive of Derso Kelen's cartoons. They are quite apart from those that they purchased. And I spent considerable time at the Palais with the archives. The most important source, as I mentioned, is Princeton University. There are 950 cartoons there. And they have all his writings also. And not only have we accessed that, but we had an art advisor, and she went to Princeton University as well. Julia, if you're online, we'd like to thank you for that. These were ready sources. Some of the others were more difficult to source. The PAX is at the University of Lausanne. If anyone knows, I know that you have a photograph. You're the only person that I know, apart from Jean-Claude Pallas, who has a photograph of their masterwork. So guard it carefully. And we had sources for one of the second slide I showed of the Tour de Babel that came from the Library of Congress. But largely they came from published portfolios. And could I just say, speaking to you today, it's very nice seeing you for the first time. I know we've corresponded, and there are other people whom I've also corresponded with who have come a long way to see us today. So thank you all for that and for your friendship and support.
I have a question here, Alejandro.
Yes. Could I, Alejandro, just to add to that, Marit, I really should also acknowledge the book that you wrote with John Foss, illustrating the League of Nations, in which you had quite a number of Derso and Kelen material. Thank you.
This one is not working.
Really, thank you very much for your presentation. It was, to me, so I'm a mathematician. I don't work in international relations, but it was an eye-opener, and it was really very much a surprise. When you shared with us the title of your presentation, it was Satire in International Relations. And are these international relations? Why didn't you just put satire in war? And even more, to provoke a little bit more, satire in war in Europe, because the South is non-existent. The South is non-existent, so why did you choose international relations? We do mentoring at Greycells, and I'm sure that if the students that we mentor find out that this is what international relations is, they will be scared. They will be doing possibly mathematics or something else. And I really was extremely happy to see the central stage that Geneva played in all of this. But why not war? Why not Europe? Because all the images were war in Europe.
Yeah, so the question from was about the Eurocentricity. The first slide of Le Testament de Genève, which showed the work of the League of Nations and for the first 10 years of existence, had showed that there was, I think, one person from the South there, and there was one woman there. So you're quite correct, the League of Nations tended to be Eurocentric. But Eric Drummond made every effort to make it universalist, to make it a universal organization. International relations, well, was born in a sense out of the League of Nations, and the science and discipline really started from studies of the League of Nations. So we can only deal with the material that we had. They were very Eurocentric, they were Hungarians, and the cartoons they provided were by and large of the big characters who were in Geneva and around Geneva at that time. However, there are the Egyptian in their very first publication in Geneva, which was had a great number of caricatured individuals of the delegations and the staff. And the interesting thing was the large number of women who were on the staff, because they showed the League as it actually was and as it was actually working. And also they showed quite a number of people from Thailand, from India, and so on, who had played a prominent role in the functions of the Assembly and in the Council of the League.
Stefan, do you want to add something to?
Well, I mean, we were asked to present our book, and this is what we've done. So we've not looked at the whole global situation of international relations. We might do that next time.
Yeah. May I ask you, how famous were Derso Kelen during their lifetime? How popular, how well-known were they during their work time?
Well, it seems to us that they were very well known. They were very widely represented in European and US press media, syndicated in the US, appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Post, various other important publications. As I said myself, they were asked by someone who they didn't know from Adam to work for him while they were still in Geneva. David Lowe, perhaps one of the premier cartoonists of the 20th century, well, I would say that because he comes from Britain, but he reckoned that their cartoons, as he put it, were not mere sketches, but historical documents valuable for all time. It was also said that no international conference was complete until they put in an appearance to caricature the participants and so on. So there's various other things I can't remember I would like to say, but they did seem to be well known at the time. I suppose one could ask the question, how many other cartoonists does one know of or remember from the 20th century? And I'm not sure that we can remember many. They seem to just fall off the map. I think also, and Julia Sekliner, who may be online, made the point that, first of all, emigrating from Hungary and then emigrating from Europe, there was really no one country that called them their own. And so they sort of slipped through the net, as it were. This may be why there's been no previous publication on them.
Thank you. I'll take a question online. Tobias, you can maybe read the question for us.
So one question from Chris Dai. He's asking, can you name other cartoonists that work in the spirit of Derso and Kelen today?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Can you name other cartoonists that works in the spirit of Derso and Kelen today?
Yeah, can you name other cartoonists that work in the spirit of...
That work in to name other cartoonists today who work in the same spirit and way that Derso and Kelen did. Well, the short answer is no. I can't actually think of any cartoonists who quite engage in the rather novel pictorial journalism that they engaged in. So I can't. I may be missing somebody, in which case I apologize. David, do you want to add to that?
Well, here in Geneva, of course, I would name Chapat.
I mean, it goes
it doesn't work exactly in the same, field or spirit, but...
Well, it goes without saying, of course, Patrick Chapat, I know of, but I'm not aware that he works quite in the same way as Derso Kelen.
You'd like to add something?
No, we had just... before we started the evening, one of the board members of the foundation, the Cartoon Freedom Foundation, Chapat's foundation, was here this evening, and we met with them the last time we were here. Very much admired Chapat, and they particularly admired what they're doing to protect cartoonists, because in a sense, Derso and Kelen were fortunate, because I give you one example when they got into trouble with the press, but what is very good about Freedom Cartoonist Foundation is that they've been very supportive of cartoonists who find it very difficult to be satirical about international relations today. And so, unfortunately, she made her apology. She had to leave early. And I know that Manuela made a great effort to try to get Chapat to come this evening, but he is, as we speak, in Lausanne performing. If you want to go and see him there, you can inscribe and go and see him. But just as Stefan said, there is no person. What we say in our book is that they embedded themselves in the League of Nations, that they were there, they were accredited journalists, they knew what the Secretariat was doing, and the important thing is that they characterized what the League of Nations was doing and what the United Nations was actually doing, and a lot of it was showing how the staff sort of were the glue that held the international organizations together.
Thank you. Anyone else for questions or comment? Okay. Yeah, here I am with the microphone.
Yes, I was wondering, now you've succeeded in writing this book. Do you have other projects?
Well, nothing like what I've just done. It probably means nothing to many people, but my personal other project is to write a book about the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Hands up, anybody who has heard of it. Some at least. That's terrific. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, your book, thank you for those, of course, following us online. Thank you for those here. The book is, of course, to be on sale, and you can have a lot of course, book signing. The book is 30 Swiss francs. We can go on and chatting about Derso Kelen, about international Geneva, about cartoonists, about maybe England too, Europe, here with some empanadas. Thank you very much, Greycells, for the great food tonight. Thank you all, and thank you so much, David and Stefan, for being with us tonight and telling about Derso Kelen and their beautiful drawings. Thank you.